Okay, here we are.
Yeah, somebody's sitting the bench.
Should we wait till they leave?
Yeah, I guess.
So let's see how much light we have.
I don't want to turn the light off on him.
Right. Here we go. Here's our screen here. If you could just come over a little,
Oh,
I'll move
sure.
over this way. We'll both be on at the same time. Still a bit more.
That should be fine.
Yeah. It's a little bright with the, it might be better going the opposite way. Let me just see what it looks like going this way. Let's see what this looks like. This is even brighter. That doesn't work.
Okay.
So I wonder if this would be better this way. Let me see. This seems to be the better way right here
All right.
without having direct.
What, direct light?
Yeah, this, see, this is much better.
Mhm.
You see? Let me get you in there. What do you think?
Oh, fine, if it's okay for you.
Yeah. Okay. We're recording. So we can start whenever you like. Wait for this person to leave.
Oh, okay. I don't know how long it's going to take. No. You don't want the lights on? Fine. Clyde, how do we turn the lights on here?
There we go. Perfect.
Okay.
Well, I want to give thanks for this opportunity to interview Father Bill McIntire, who lives here at Maryknoll, New York, after a very successful missionary career in Bangladesh for many, how many, is it 4 decades?
42 years.
42 years.
Yeah, in Bangladesh.
So this is the
Calcutta.
first of 2 sessions. And I want to introduce Father McIntire, if he wants to. We're classmates from
Maryknoll class of 67,
67. And
55 years ago.
right. So this is an opportunity for me to interview him and for him to share some of his life story, beginning, of course, even before Maryknoll. But so should we start with your early years, Bill?
Oh, we'll be fine,
Yeah.
Jerry.
I know
Sure.
you grew up in Boston,
I
correct?
did in the Boston area. I went to Boston public schools. We're mostly Irish, but like my grandfather was a direct descendant of Philip McIntire, who arrived in Salem in 1640.
Wow.
And my grandfather, who was an operator on the Boston Elevated Railway, my grandmother wouldn't marry him unless he became a Catholic. He was, a Congregationalist or something. But I'm a working class, Boston boy. And I went to, Boston public schools. I never was in a Catholic school until I
Really?
joined Maryknoll. And, I remember, but at that time, the Boston public schools had a very religious bent,
Uh-huh.
I remember my 3rd grade teacher in a neighborhood where there were a lot of Jewish students.
Mhm.
Every morning we began the day with the 23rd Psalm,
Wow.
2 Corinthians on charity. And on Jewish days of obligation, she'd send the Jewish children home.
Wow.
And if we Catholic children had not been, she was a Congregationalist herself. She'd march us off to St. Angela's Church in Mattapan Square, And then I went to Boston Latin School, which was,
It's a
in my
high-level
opinion,
school.
was founded in 1635. And it was a very tough school. They flunked out a theater class every year. So the 200 who survived to graduate in 1949 were, I think everyone got into college, and 86 of the 200 got into Harvard.
Wow.
And I think 20 of the 86 graduated from Harvard summa cum laude. I went on to Harvard. I had a half scholarship in the class of 1953. And
what was your field of study? Was it
government, political science, and at Harvard? And I had some wonderful teachers. I remember especially William L. Langer, who was a wonderful historian, and I took almost all of his classes on 19th, 20th century European history, and interested, graduate level in some seminars with him. He's a teacher I remember especially, but he was very good, and of course it was very competitive. And I wrote my honors thesis on American diplomacy in Iran.
Oh, wow.
And I remember the teacher, Richard, but the tutor, we had a tutorial system like that in the English, in Cambridge or Oxford. Him anxious, he wanted me to apply for a Fulbright to take, which he was sure I would get, to study in Iran. But in a way, I didn't take that course. So after Harvard, I went on. I was accepted by Harvard Law School, Columbia Graduate School, where I know you studied, and also by Harvard Graduate School, for a master's degree in international affairs. And but I didn't have a scholarship. I had worked always, during high school and college, cleaning.
Are you an only child, Bill?
My brother was born in 1945,
right,
so he's 13. My brother Bob, who lives in Vienna, Virginia, is still there. But he was born 13 and a half years after me. So because I didn't have any scholarship, it was getting difficult to finance it on my own. At the end of the year, I remember going the first year of graduate studies at the Litauer Center for Public Administration. I remember going to Sam Beer, who was president of Americans for Democratic Action, and saying, "What do you do when you're bored with school and fed up with school and broke?" And he said, "Join the Army as an enlisted man. It will be a great socializing experience for you." So I did, and it was. I was assigned with a Polish Jewish boy from the Lower East Side to the after basic training and so forth as a clerk typist in Dachau, Germany, the side of the right outside of Munich. But it was very fruitful, a year and a half in Europe, in sort of.
What years were those?
54 to 56. And I traveled all over Europe. I remember May 1st, 1955, attending Mass at the Cologne Cathedral, then taking the train to Aachen, and then up to Brussels, to the Grand Place, and sitting on the steps of the Bourse, watching the May Day parade. And the next day, taking the train up to Leuven, the Catholic University of Leuven, where I applied for a Fulbright scholarship to study Catholic social thinking at the Catholic. I didn't get that, but that's what my interests were very strongly in Catholic social thinking. I think one of the interesting things is.
May I ask a question? How did you happen to get involved with the Catholic social teaching? Was that already something part of your personal?
Well, I think I always had a strong social conscience. And while I was at Harvard, I was almost ready. I think when I was 19, maybe the beginning of my junior year, I remember sort of saying that, God, I'll give you,
Mhm.
3 months to just sort of show me a sign that
Right.
I should stay in the Catholic Church, because I was very upset by Joe McCarthy at the
Mhm.
time and Franco Spain and various other things like that. But
It's just interesting how you gravitated towards Catholic social teaching, even though you weren't in a Catholic institution.
Yeah.
But you picked that up kind of,
and
even though you were in a secular institution.
And to backtrack a little bit, like at the end of high school, I did talk to the Jesuits on Newbury Street in Boston. I briefly considered, joining the. And I had, I worked as a meter reader for the Boston Edison Company, for several summers, and I was always working, during my college years. But anyway, in the fall term of my junior year, I sort of said, just show me a sign, God. And my classmate, who later became Brenda Carter Law, he organized a retreat for 80 Harvard students at Campion Hall, North Andover, Mass., a Jesuit retreat center at the time. And I just made a weekend retreat there with Father William J. Donahue, who had been president of Holy Cross College in Worcester, Mass., and the brother of Bishop Fred Donahue, who was in Miaoli, Taiwan. And at the end of that, I don't know whether it was the sight of 80 houses on their knees or what. But
what
anyway,
year was that we're talking about?
That was about November 1951.
Okay.
And I went back to St. Paul's Church in Harvard Square that night and knelt before the Blessed Sacrament for an hour or two. And I've never had serious doubts in faith since. I've been blessed with through all the many vicissitudes
right.
the last.
So that was a kind of a turning point in your life.
It certainly was, and I was 19, so that's 71 years ago.
Right.
A long time ago. So when I went into the Army, and when I came back, I went back to Harvard Graduate School to get my master's degree in international relations. But during that year also, I applied.
What year did you go back to?
1956, 1957. I got my master's degree in international relations in 1957. But I remember that I applied during that year to the Holy Cross Fathers in Stonehill. They had a college. They still have a college in Massachusetts, but they were maybe overeager to get me, and I knew I had a sense. I think I've always been a people person. I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in a classroom,
right?
And I think if I joined Holy Cross, I probably would have, spent most of my life in the classroom. So anyway, in 1957, I told them, I guess about May, that I would not, join Holy Cross. But I got a job through Senator John F. Kennedy's office in Boston. I remember seeing his administrative assistant. I got a job in the Labor Department in Washington, where I worked for 4 years, from 1957 to 1961. And that was a wonderful time. I remember the day I arrived in in Washington. I was reading an issue of Jubilee,
Mhm.
the Catholic magazine at the time, and it was a story about a person who became a good friend and mentor, Jim Guinan, who was running the St. Peter Claver Interracial Friendship House
Mhm.
in Southeast Washington. And he had been a Navy officer, and he had spent a brief time in the Trappists. And now he was directing this Catherine de York Doherty Friendship House in Washington, D.C. And the interviewer of the Jubilee article asked Jim, why would anybody with a master's degree in philosophy do? His answer was, what better thing to do with a degree in philosophy than run an interracial friendship house? But that was my first real experience in Washington of a real community,
Mhm.
rich and poor, young and old, black and white and everything. We got together, for serious prayer and serious, and we'd go out on weekends to try to, to sell, to give away copies of the Friendship House newspaper on the steps of, but it's integrated groups. And I was, during those years also, I was secretary of the Catholic Integration Council in Washington. And I was also secretary of the Washington Catholic Roundtable, which was the organization where Catholic men, mainly working in the State Department, and in the Commerce Department, Labor Department, we got together for weekly lunch, and met informally. I mean, we became good friends with many of those men. And I remember one of the meetings, one of the other men said, I think he's a secret Jesuit. So the other man said, well, what do you say that? He's so devout. And what does that have to do with being a secret Jesuit? But I worked, my mentor and my main contact in the Labor Department was Dr. Arnold Steinbach. And he was the world expert on the international trade unionism, and highly esteemed. He wanted me to be his successor in that field because I had a very good memory. I remember, going out for lunch with lay attaches of different European countries. And I could, the next 3 days, I'd sit at my typewriter and write out a verbatim report of the conversations with all. I remember without even having to take notes. Wow! I'd remember all the, the names and dates and everything else. At that time, it was a very good memory. And but then I came into contact with Maryknoll.
What year was that?
Well, in I guess in 1959, I drove up with my little brother, who was then only 13 or so, 13, 14, to Commonwealth, Ontario, for a week on Catholic. So, I don't know. That was I did drive over with my brother, and we had a week of Catholic social action, but they also made us. There was a lot of manual labor and everything. Right. Anyway, a Maryknoll seminarian, Ken Riley, was there, and he invited me to meet him at the Bedford Novitiate the following January.
I know it very well.
And so I did, And that set into motion a number of friendships with Father Tom Morris, in the class of 1964, who was the Dane who died of cancer in 1970. But so they, Maryknoll, because of a lot of them came down to see me. I think the summer of 1960, and I was invited to come up to Maryknoll to give a talk on the missioner's role and work betterment or something like that, in a program organized by Eugene Higgins, Father Eugene Higgins, and MOES, Maryknoll Overseas Extension Service at the time. But before that, just in January before that, I had gone as the only white person to a retreat in Potomac, Maryland, at the Jesuit Retreat Center then, with John Lafarge, and about 100 members of the Knights of St. John. At that time, the Knights of Columbus were segregated.
Wow.
They didn't accept black members. But there was a strong Knights of St. John chapter in Washington, D.C. So I drove down with a black friend, and I was the only, white, maybe 100 retreatants. So of course, John Lafarge, wonderful John Lafarge, the man who was ordinary, and the champion and the founder of the Catholic Interracial Justice Movement, called me into the office, and I had a nice talk with him. And I think I sort of shared, that I still had an interest in the priesthood, and was trying to discern whether I should continue with my work at the Labor Department, which I liked very much. I enjoyed the work and the context. I had a weekly radio program, Faith in Millions. It's a short program. I don't know how many people listened to it, but we had that. And I was involved in all kinds of things in Washington, D.C. But finally, later that month, besides coming up to Maryknoll and giving that talk, and sort of, I also, the Knights of St. John invited me to give a community breakfast talk on Catholic leadership at Union Station, Washington, D.C. And we were having, after the Mass at St. Aloysius.
What year was that?
January 1961, which was a sort of a key month in my life. And I made the retreat. I made the retreat with the Knights of St. John. I had to come up to Maryknoll to give my talk, so I had that contact. And I was ready to give I came to walk from St. Aloysius Church on North Capitol Street to give this talk at the community breakfast. And with me was Dr. Llewellyn Scott, who was a black hunchback man. And he shared with me, on the walk down, something that I had known before, but that when he was very young, he had a very strong desire to be a priest. But because he was black, and because he was hunchback, he was unable to get admission to any seminary at the time. But he wasn't discouraged. And I think the attitudes of the Washington blacks at that time, especially at St. Paul and Augustine Parish on 15th Street Northwest, were very inspiring for me. It was complete nonviolence or anything like that. And Llewellyn Scott, this man that I was talking to, he, under the influence of Dorothy Day, he founded the Saint. I'm trying to think of the name. He's founded a Martin de Porres a hospice. It wasn't a hospice in our present sense, but it was a a shelter for up to 100 homeless men, and he accepted black and white men for
This was in
30 years.
Washington?
In Northeast Washington, yeah, for 30 years. And as far as I know, they never had any serious problems. He was, his cause for canonization, I don't know if it's still pending. There's a statue of him. But anyway, I was so edified by him. So I gave my talk. And coming back, Washington, Father John Considine. So I called John up and said, he was the director of the Latin American Bureau. And at that point, I was the Latin American specialist for the Labor Department. So we were good friends. And, said, this is what's been happening to me this month. John, do you think it's foolish for me at age 29 to think of joining Marino? But he was enthusiastic about my coming in. So that's when I applied to come into Marino. When I dreaded telling Arnold Steinbach, this Austrian socialist, who was a wonderful man, really remarkable man, and I had many good contacts. I always thank God that I had so many contacts with good people who were, Jewish or even non-believers, but who had a tremendous sense for the poor, for social justice, and also, for international well-being. By the way, at Harvard, I had been the Secretary General of the United Nations Council.
Wow.
And in my sophomore year, I got Harvard to fly from University Hall on October 24th, 1950, the United Nations flag.
Wow.
And I think it was the first time that the United States flag had flown. So I was, very internationalist and unusually so at that time. Of course, by this time I had the experience in, a year and a half in Germany and travels around Europe and so on.
You didn't get the name senator yet. That came later?
Well, I'm not in Marino yet.
Pardon?
I'm not in Marino.
Okay,
yet.
that was only after you came into Marino.
But that was, that name was given me by my classmates at Glen Ellen, because I had come from Washington.
Right.
So that was a nice man. So anyway, I was terribly afraid because Arnold Steinbach, this
You're getting back to that.
distinguished man. So I finally got up the courage to write a letter and put it on his desk. But I expected an explosion, but he came into my office and put his arm on my shoulder and said, Bill, the first time you came into my office, I thought of the altar boys leading the Corpus Christi procession in my native Galicia. And he said, I'm proud to have a priest come into this office and be a good priest. And if I'm alive when you're ordained, I hope to come to your ordination. And he did come to my ordination here at Marino. And he did more than that. I wrote some articles for the edition of the New Catholic Encyclopedia, which was published in 1962, 63. And so I wrote to him, and I also had an invitation to give a talk on International Federation of Christian Trade Unions at American University in Washington. So I wrote to Arnold after my first year at Cornell, and this is jumping ahead a little bit. I said, Arnold, can I come into the office and use the files? And Arnold, who said you can do anything in the government if you sign the right papers, he said, I can do more than that. I'll hire you back as a consultant. So he did that for my five sons at the seminary.
Wonderful.
So I kept up my, clearances and my contacts. And of course, it was a big help financially, to
Sure.
in my studies in the Marino. So I joined Marino then at Glen Ellen for 1 year. John Considine said it's important that you go through all the ropes. He said, the men will respect you more. But so I arrived at Glen Ellen, and as a junior, I was.
What year was that again?
1961, September 1961. And at that time, we had 380 students at Glen Ellen. And I was the eldest by about 3 years of all the 380. And I was due to spend 2 years studying philosophy and Latin. But 12 years after I graduated from Boston Latin School, I think I was about the best in Latin of any student at Glen Ellen because they had really drilled it into us. And so that came back in a flash. I was able to, sight read the Latin poets and so forth. And so they, Father Tom Wilcox were teaching me Latin, but he didn't enjoy it because, I was the only one who really enjoyed for courses on the Latin poets or whatever. And I quickly breezed through the philosophy courses. Didn't really get too much out of them because we didn't use original sources.
I see.
And
no Summa Theologica.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Oh, this is philosophy, right? And I like I Harvard had taken a course on modern philosophy where we studied Descartes, Hume, Kant, Whitehead, Descartes, Whitehead, and so on. And we use the original sources, which they always did it, at Harvard. So I just spent 1 year at Glen Ellen, and I remember when I went in, this was my third time of thinking of studying for the priesthood, and I had left to work in Washington, and I had a couple of pretty serious girlfriends. Right. In my Washington years. So it was a big jump for me to join Marino at age 29. But I remember sort of my attitude was I enjoyed the energy and the community and the joy of the Marino seminaries at the time so much, and wanted to be a part of that community. Mm-hmm. I feel badly for the young people who are joining Marino now because they don't have really that. Yeah, they don't have that. Literally, I was ready to wash dishes for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. That's what Marino wanted me to do. And I remember on the Feast of the Presentation, November 1961, about close to 90, young men received the cassock for the first time. And I remember one of the brothers who was a 1905 Harvard College graduate and took a special interest in me. He said, well, now that you received the cassock, you have to be buried in it. Well, that was it. So so after that, at the end of Glen Ellen, my dad had a nervous breakdown. And so before the end of the year, I was called back to Boston because the expenses were very great at a sanatorium in Boston. And my brother was only 16, 17 years old. And so I said, well, I probably have to give up my vocation and go to work again.
Mhm.
So I did briefly go to work, but then the situation seemed to lighten, and I was able to take the program at the Baynard for 6 weeks, and also to work for 6 weeks in the Labor Department of Washington. Yeah, so I was ready to go back to the novitiate in Bedford, in the fall of '62, and so I spent that year there with Arthur Kinnan and John McCormick as the novice master and assistant novice master. And I guess there were about maybe 80 started, and maybe 58 or something came to Marino, first theology in 1963. And then I guess I met you about 63.
63,
yeah.
right.
And we were classmates. 63, I'll say, yeah.
63 to 67.
Which you were, I thought you were the last 3 years. So
The last 3 years, because I went to the novitiate after first theology.
Okay.
Yeah.
So anyway, we went through the program here, and were ordained in 1967,
Right.
June 10th, 1967. You've always been, fond of reminding me
Right.
of that, of our ordination day. I congratulate you, Jerry. You took another path in another way. You've always been a wonderful Marino.
I hope so. I still feel part of Marino spirit.
As zealous for mission as any person, with Marita, your wife, as any person that I've ever met.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So that brings us up to my ordination.
Now, during your time in theology, things were changing in the world of theology, because I remember in that period, we were getting new ideas coming in from Vatican Council II. How did you experience your?
Well, I was very open. And of course, we were sort of introduced to the new thinking,
right?
And I think there was basically not too much opposition to it.
No, I don't think so.
At Marino.
We had some wonderful professors.
Yeah, like Bill McCarthy and
Yeah.
so forth in church history, and Bill Frazier,
Joe Grassi,
and Joe Grassi in scripture and so forth, which I enjoyed very much. And each summer, summer of '64, instead of working at the Labor Department, the Labor Department sent me on a trip to 8 Latin American countries to do
wonderful
studies on the Christian trade union. So I visited in '64 for the first time Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, and then backtracked to Panama, Honduras, and Guatemala, or something like that.
I think you're probably the only Marino priest who had such a wide-ranging career through your training period, where you combine both your studies in theology and continued a career with the government.
Yeah.
Quite unusual.
It
gave you a broad
It gave me a
understanding
broad
of your
understanding
mission,
of it.
which I think you carried through your whole life.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the exceptional parts of your story. I don't think there are many priests, either in Marino.
Plus,
Yeah. But it gave you a tremendous global understanding.
It did.
Yeah. As you brought out both your
But it
experience.
was Eurocentric, like a.
But then Latin America came into the picture.
Yeah, it did. And
It started off Eurocentric, but
I remember reading Christopher Dawson, and he gave I think my idea at the time, Christopher Dawson gave a course at Harvard while I was there. And he was a great
I remember
historian.
I read some of his books. Yeah.
One of his talks was "Faith is Europe, and Europe is the faith." which is not proved to be true
Right,
now. I
right.
mean, but that was the sort of the attitude in the at least in the 50s.
Right. So did you, when you went to Latin America, did that change any of your, anything? Did it have any?
Well,
effect on-
I was sort of I
Because you
had
eventually went as a
the
priest to Latin
in
America.
the summer of 1965. I went with John Donahue and
Mhm.
others to Colombia, and we had contacts with the Camilo Torres, and so
Uh-huh.
on, who was still a priest,
Right.
and I remember being in the next room where he was discussing with confreres whether or not he should join the guerrillas.
Mhm.
And John Donahue, I got to know at that time, Camilo quite well. And of course, Camilo did choose to join the guerrillas. And in the summer of '66, I spent 6 weeks in Peru, visiting the Altiplano and Chimbote, and being introduced, for example, by Greg, your friend, our friend,
Mhm.
late Father Greg Vienzo.
Still alive.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. But
really,
you- but you mean-
I'm not even getting messed up on that. No, and Greg had been working with Gustavo Gutierrez.
Right.
So we met Gustavo, for the first time. in
66.
66. And of course, all this was new to me. I wrote my whatever, the thesis we had to write at the end on, Catholic social movement. So I was a strong devotee at the time. I regretted it in the future, and then later on, of the Christian Democrats, who were pretty vital in 1967. The Copianos in Venezuela, whom I had visited, and some of them I had brought to Marino, to speak and so forth. And in Chile, but in later years, some of them pretty sour. Some of the Venezuelans, especially, were walked the walk until the end of their lives. But I was very disappointed with Eduardo Frei and other people in Chile. With the they won the election as a minority. They had about 35%, I think, but they were the biggest group, and they took over. But then they were Salvador Allende took over. Frey had been earlier. I remember later.
Allende was the one who kind of went a different direction, correct?
Oh, he was a socialist, a self-declared socialist. And of course, he was killed, and he committed suicide. He died in the La Moneda on September 11th, 1973. That's the other date for September 11th. The Pinochets.
Pinochet was the one that really turned back the clock.
I remember as Marino Secretary General from 1972 to 78, I went to Santiago, and someone came to me, a friend of Miguel Descotos, sort of man in Santiago, and he said to me that Eduardo Frei wants to see you, and I said, "I'm sorry, no, I will not see you." Eduardo Frei. I was so upset because of the torture and everything that was going on, in which he was complicit at that time. So, so let's see, at the time of ordination.
After ordination, I
was assigned to Peru and went down to since I had been, to Latin America several times, I asked John McCormick if I could fly down. But he said, no, they had free tickets on the Santa Magdalena, the Graceliner. So I took the 13-day trip through the Panama Canal, with stops in Haiti and Barranquilla and Cali and Buenaventura. and Colombia, Quito, and then down to Lima. And then flew to Cochabamba, I had taken early morning language classes at the Foreign Service Institute in Arlington, Virginia.
So you're always proficient in
Well,
Spanish?
I was thinking that I was going to spend my life in the labor movement. I studied Italian to the fluent level, and because I wanted to be labor attaché in Rome, I guess at the time. But I did take 1 year in Spanish. I had to sort of forget the Italian to get the Spanish correctly. But I spoke Spanish well enough that you could make that trips to Latin America, be reasonably fluent in the language at that time.
So when you were assigned to Bolivia,
I signed to Peru.
assigned to Peru,
Yeah,
but you went to the language school in
Yeah,
Cochabamba.
just for a refresher, I spent only about 5 months. And then because I had worked with a Centro de Acción Social, which was mainly located in Chimbote, Peru, there was a fellow, Henry Camacho.
Oh, yes, I've heard a lot about him.
He's still
Yeah.
alive. He lives, I just talked to him last week. He's blind now. And he lives at the Washington Priory of the Dominicans. And he lobbied very hard to get me and another Marino associate priest to work with him in this Equipo para el Desarrollo Social in Chimbote. So that was my first assignment in Peru, in this place, Chimbote, which was
In 67.
at the end of 67. Yeah. I got there at the end of 67. But I had been there. I had visited, the previous year, and I got to know Henry. And so those were interesting years. They were, revolutionary years. The Maoists were in charge of the unions in Chimbote, and Henry Camacho invited Jose Maria Arguedas, who was a well-known Peruvian novelist, but who had some breakdown problems, to stay with us in the Dominican community in Chimbote. That was, in fact, the Dominican community in Chimbote. There was another Dominican community in La Paz, Bolivia, Baez, I think at the time. But almost all of them, left. But we didn't lose any of the Chimbote group because there was a very strong prayer life. And I appreciated that time with the Dominicans. And
well, the Dominicans also had a role at Cochabamba, as I remember.
Yeah. And they were in La Paz also.
Yeah.
But anyway, with this Jose Maria Arguedas, so he stayed with us for a year, and he wrote a novel in which Henry Camacho and I, Los Zorros de Arriba and Los Zorros de Abajo. And Henry and I
Higher in the novel?
Yeah, but it's not too favorable. Of course, a fast-talking gringo, who sort of knows all the answers. I sort of apologize for that now. But anyway, that was his take. Anyway, after being with us, I remember him saying, Jose Maria Arguedas, that the Moscow, the Peking line, the Maoists, and asked him, they said, who do you think we're going to shoot, when we come to power? And the answer was people like you, the Mensheviks,
Wow.
the moderate Moscow line.
Yeah.
Communists. And that was one thing that bothered me, in the work in Latin America, especially being heavily involved in political and social questions.
Right.
You didn't know whether the bullet was coming from the right or from the left.
Right. Now, did you work a lot with Gregory Enzo at that time?
No, I did not.
Yeah.
And
He was in Gustavo, I guess, in university work.
right, he was in university work with. But anyway, I was at the founding meeting in March '98 of UNIS, the Peruvian preschool, which I think was a first group of priests to organize. And
What year was that?
March 1968. I was only 4 months in the country. But we had the meeting in Cieneguilla, and we had it at the building, which was the former language school for the St. James Fathers, St. James Fathers from Boston. And I had been involved in writing Cardinal Cushing and asking, him to sell, this place for a nominal amount, and he did, and he was very generously. But anyway, so I had a background at that scene. But anyway, there were only about Henry Camacho, Father Fred Smith, MM, and I, late Father Fred and I, were the only ones there to. Gustavo did not attend that meeting.
I see.
Because he was afraid of the leading force, Father Romeo Luna Victoria, SJ, who had been close to the armed forces and he had some very strong views. But anyway, Gustavo didn't want to be associated with him. Anyway, we went. And there were, I think, maybe there were 150 priests there. I maybe not that many, but anyway, we signed. We three foreigners were among the signatories to a declaration, saying there was, against social injustice,
right?
Which was published the next day on the front page of the opposition newspaper.
Do you think that the church, the progressive elements in the church, helped keep the shining path from even more terrible?
Well, that's much later.
Much later.
Yeah, and I'll talk about that
okay.
later. But at this time, the cardinal was a Franciscan, Cardinal André Ricketts. And he was very much in favor of Gustavo, and he took Gustavo with him as his theologian at the meeting.
So he was just coming into his own at this time. Had he written Gustavo Gutierrez?
Yeah, he was just coming into his own.
Yeah.
And anyway,
this is the late 60s.
So anyway, it was a call from Nelson Roland Terry was the president of Peru at the time. And there was a call to the U.S. Embassy from the council. What are American priests doing? Signing this, document denouncing social injustice in Peru. And so the head of the political section in the U.S. Embassy, Frank Ortiz, whom I had known, who had been a colleague of mine when I worked in Washington, and he was on the boat with us coming down.
Right.
But he called Henry and me on the carpet and said, "You're in danger of being, persona non grata, declared persona non grata by the government, by the Nelson Malone Terry government." And so, I should have, to shut up. Yeah. And if possible, even get out of the country.
Would you say, Bill, that this early period of your missionary vocation was focused more on social justice issues?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I always enjoyed the pastoral work.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
and sort of want to do it more. But I was heavily focused on.
Mhm.
But so I did leave. I did leave Peru, but I went to Venezuela to see my friend Emilio Maspero.
What year was that?
This was right after I was almost kicked out of Peru
Oh,
in 1968 to see who was Argentinian, who was Secretary General of the Latin American Confederation of Christian Trade Unions.
mhm.
And he, so Emilio, I think Joe Heim, Father Joe Heim, who's here now, was with me. But anyway, Emilio said, "Oh, Billy, you've done such a wonderful job. Why don't you go to Colombia and Ecuador and try to form similar priest groups there?"
That was not a Maryknoll mission at the time, either one of those two countries.
Well, I think we had some people in
Oh, did you?
Colombia. Yeah, not in. So I went to Colombia, and we and talked to the Christian Trade Union leaders, and we arranged to have a meeting on. Arranged to have a meeting to which 4 bishops and quite a number of good priests came.
What country was this? Venezuela?
Colombia.
Colombia.
And we had it at
This was before the Medellin.
Yeah, this was before.
Yeah.
Medellin was in the fall then.
Right. The famous
right.
conference there. Yeah.
But Golconda meeting at Golconda meeting. And so Henry and I went and, sort of facilitated the meeting.
Mhm. Henry Camacho was a big part of your life in this period.
Oh, he was, yeah. And it's sad to see him now, he's blind. And still his mind is still very. But anyway, but one of the things we said, we advise you not to issue any declarations because it's just, it could, blow up the church. And that meeting was very, the four bishops were present within a year in Colombia. But within a year or two, I think all 4 of the bishops were dead.
Wow.
One died, and Bishop Facultativa died in a suspicious strange car crash, and another died in a suspicious plane crash, and so we were
It's dangerous times.
Yeah, and in the fall of '68, I went to a program in Ladas in Chile for Latin American trade unionists. And which was very good. But anyway, so we were ordinary trade unionists from all over Latin America, and I was the only American. But I got hepatitis, so I had to.
What year was this now?
This was the end of at the time of Medellin, and at the end of '68, which was a key year for me as it was for the world.
Right.
So I was not allowed to do anything in the Santiago Center House. I had to rest completely, but finally was released. I got back to Lima by the end of December 1968, and so immediately we began to plan a meeting for Onis del Norte at our Center of Social Action in Chibodi, and Gustavo Gutierrez by this time was interested in joining us, and he was a keen speaker. So I was typing out Gustavo Gutierrez. This is January 1969, I believe, and I was typing out. Gustavo had just been at Medellin, and it was highly liked. By Cardinal Juan Desiree Ricketts. And so I typed the title of Gustavo's talk, Sia una tela here del desarrollo. And he said, Guillermo, he said, let's change that to Sia una tela here del liberación. So that was a historic moment. I don't know if it was the first time.
Yeah,
That's I know that's a
that's
fact.
interesting. Yeah.
So he gave the talk, and we kept in contact. And then in January '69, also, while I was in Chile, the Velasco Alvarado had a coup against the Nelson Mandela government, and but it was very, I told you this Father Romeo and Victoria had influenced so I wrote an article, a little later for Catholic Mind on the Peruvian education law put in by the military junta was based on Paulo Freire's, conscientious.
Wow.
And it was, very advanced. And they moved for agrarian reform. And at first, the first year or two of this military junta, it seemed wonderful.
Right.
In 19, so in Djibouti, I know this is all sort of complicated, but another father, David Farrell, CSC, who had been ordained in Chile in 1969, joined our team in Djibouti. We, but under the Velasco Alvarado regime, the regime expropriated International Petroleum Company, the American-owned petroleum company. And, Dave Farrell and I went and we got a declaration posted, signed by the Protestant groups wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot wall, but with the Jewish rabbi, or the Catholic, 10 Catholic missionary priests and sisters and brothers to sign a declaration saying property rights are not absolute, but should be subjected to the common good, Catholic social justice. So this was published also, and I published, it was published in the Catholic Mind, the Jesuit, a Jesuit publication at the time, and this upset the American embassy terribly.
I'm sure.
I think it was the first time that American missionaries in a foreign country had gone against the
American
country. So in 1970, all of a sudden somebody showed up in Djibouti and invited David Farrell, CSC, and me to give talks on the talk I was given. They were planning a meeting and their Wingspread Foundation in Racine, Wisconsin, on American, but all this in the context of the expropriations, and the Velasco, and they invited the Minister of Petroleum, was a former general, Lopez Baca, I think, and they invited David and me to give talks. I remember, I checked with Marino, and Marino always was very, Marty Murphy, the Peru regional superior, said at the time, Bill, if you get kicked out, maybe we shall all get kicked out.
Who was superior at the time?
Father Marty Murphy, Martin Murphy,
For the region.
I had complete support both in the church.
Wonderful.
And there was no you know, like
Mhm.
in the 90s at the time of I was in, you know, Peru for a visit in 96, for example. There was Cipriano, who was an Opus Dei
Things have
cardinal, and
changed.
he cooperated with the government to get
Wow.
the Central, and also, you know, who
Right.
invaded the Japanese embassy, and
Right.
they were all slaughtered. But
Yeah.
he cooperated with the government, the Fujimori government, to, you know, all the terrorists were killed. You know, all young people.
Right.
Yeah. But that was a very different time.
Yeah.
In Peru, and that was.
So- Yeah.
Cipriano.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think maybe we could finish up your tenure. When did you leave Latin America?
Well,
As didn't you join the Marinol General Council in this?
yeah. Well, the last year and a half in Peru, I came back to Marinol the fall of 1970, and at Father Bill D. McCarthy's instigation, I gave a seminar for about 20 Marinol seminarians on Latin America. It was once a week, but I think it was pretty well organized. And
Great.
But Bill also asked me to teach a seminar at General Theological, the Anglican Seminary.
Wonderful.
In New York, and I team taught with Howard Carpenter, who was professor at the time of systematic theology. And I think I was the first Catholic priest, you know,
Wonderful.
to teach at General Theological. And I enjoyed the.
What year was that again, Bill?
That was the fall of 1970. And you know, like Roy Bourgeois was one of my students in the seminar.
Right.
Here. And I remember some wonderful young Welsh Anglican, you know, students of General Theology. I enjoyed them very much. And then in January 1971, I drove, you know, Roy Bourgeois and various other seminarians who were interested. So we're meeting of the Catholic Inter-American Cooperation Program at the Shoreham Hotel in Washington. And but it was Father John Considine had been the director of Latin America. It was taken over though by Father Colonnesi, who was a man from Iowa, who, in my opinion, did a terrible job. And I remember people saying, you know, to me, you know, respected, you know, veteran trade unionists and everything else, saying this is the most, I've heard some of the most unchristian things I've ever heard at this, you know, at the SICOM meeting. And I remember we got, you know, reductions in the rates by our willingness to help out. And, you know, I remember there was we had you know, it was Saturday evening, we had
You're back here at the States for a while now.
Yeah, this is the SICOP meeting at the Shoreham Hotel in
Okay.
Washington in January 1971. And at the meeting, the so-called liturgy, where they were flashing raw, you know, slides and we're encouraged to throw marshmallows across the room as a sign of sharing at the time of the Eucharist. And you know, so Father Fred McGuire, because he didn't want to do it himself, he asked me to get up and announce to the 2,000 people there at the shore that for those who want to observe their weekend obligation. We'll have a Catholic mass downstairs. And so I got up and said, Father Fred Mariah has asked me to announce that be a Catholic mass downstairs with booze and everything else. And so I repeated it in Spanish. So Padre, Mariah has asked me and so on. And so we went down and we had our mass, but the spirit was very poor.
Who were these representatives at this meeting?
Well, it was, they were sort of
Trade unionists?
No. It was, it was about the third Catholic American. First one was in Boston, or one of the first ones was in Boston in January 1967. And
But there had been a shift.
Ivan Illich, Monsignor Ivan Illich, had just published his article in America on the seamy side of charity, how American missionaries have become court chaplains to the AID.
So this was
Cardinal Cushing was very upset about that.
Yeah.
And Bill McCarthy was with me in Boston, January 19. So this is a couple of meetings later, and the strong hand of John Considine was removed, and sort of
so it's a whole different era. Again, the focus was on Latin America.
I remember, Rory Bush was coming to me and saying, "I'm fed up." I said, "What happened?" He was called out of the meeting countless times by Fran Neeson, who was the sort of the Colonese, secretary. And she said, she called him out of the meeting. And she said, Roy, I have an important job for you. And he said, what is this? As a Marine.
Yeah.
He said, I want you to go out and buy 3 cans of red hot dog food for Father Colonnese's dog. So I said, I said, Roy, ignore her.
Yeah.
Don't he didn't go back again. But the positive thing in that meeting was that Gustavo Villegas, for the first time, gave a presentation.
I see.
And I think the next year, the theology was published in Spanish, and then right after that, by Orbis, if it was Orbis at that.
So Orbis got involved in a lot of these issues.
Oh yeah, very much so. So that was Miguel, who was on all sides of. He supported the Pinochet dictatorship, and
Miguel did.
Miguel did, sure. And anyway, we were talking about how so anyway, I was the last year and a half. I was Vicar General in Holy Fellowshir under the saintly and wonderful Bishop Ed Fetters.
Sure, I remember him.
And he, when I think back, some of the major figures of my life certainly Ed Fetters was one of them. He was a very holy man, and
Well, he was our superior here at Marino.
No, this is Al Fetters.
Oh, this is
yes, this is his brother.
His brother, okay.
But Al, told me when I was a deacon that I want to get you, or before, because I didn't. Before that, I want to get you for my brother in Peru. I think Al was partly instrumentalized by assignment from Peru. But anyway, I was named
as Vicar General.
Yeah, and so worked, for a year and a half. But I was elected then as the second assistant on the regional council.
And what year was that?
1972.
Yeah.
So I had to resign, and also as a chapter delegate. So I had to resign, as a Vicar General, and I spent so I came up here, in September 72 for the 5-month-long general.
Wow, that was a
chapter.
long
It
chapter.
was
Yeah.
the sixth general chapter. And during I sat next to Miguel Descoto. We were good friends. And Miguel turned to me, I think, on one of the first days of the chapter. And he said, Bill, if I'm elected Superior General, would you be my Vicar General? So I said, well, I'll certainly consider it, I don't think. But there was no move to elect Miguel as, and there was no move to reelect John McCormick either.
Right.
And the brothers participated, but they, sort of, John McCormick during his 6-year term had sort of squashed them.
Mm-hmm.
If they didn't go on for college studies, he put them out of Maryville.
Wow.
And so at the so Ray Hill was elected the Superior General. Joe Glenn was elected the Assistant General. Right. Now Bishop Quinn Weitzel, later Bishop of Pango, American Samoa, was a third Assistant General and in charge of finances and so forth during our term. The fourth Assistant General was Bill O'Leary from Korea, wonderful man, another very strong friend, a wonderful friend. He was younger than me. He died back in 2007. And I was elected by one vote. And the reason I was elected by one vote was that the other candidate for the fifth position on the General Council was Miguel Descoto. But John Gorski told me that he went to the brothers and said, who do you think would be best to represent you brothers on the new General Council? And the brothers said, Bill McIntire.
Wow.
So I often wonder, if I had been elected, I would have gone back to,
right.
I would have gone back to Peru in my life. That was one of many times when a seeming little thing made all the difference
right.
in the world.
Well, maybe we'll bring this today to a conclusion because we had a good hour and a half.
Good.
And we'll continue your story.
Okay.
Wonderful story.
Yeah.
Such a meaningful story of not just your life, but Mary Noel's life.
Yes.
And this.
Well, I think it's important.
Yeah. Right.
Very.
And I think also we'll get into the joint committee, which was part of your when you.
Yes. I'd like to, maybe we can talk tomorrow.
That was another.
Some of my special interests.
Yes.
And one of them was, the joint committee.
And then John Donohue's study, which he did.
Yeah. All right. So we look forward to
next Thursday.
Next Thursday. Okay. Thanks.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thanks,
and we'll look forward to Thursday, and we'll record this and we'll pass it on now to the Mary Noel office,